Well, Stephen, we always do a closer look here on the rundown. And of course, the closest look that we really needed to take overall this year was kind of the economy, if you want to take that as a big picture story, because the greater economy globally was driven by some big geopolitical news, but some smaller shifts in the tech industry that I think kind of line up with some of those bigger geopolitical concerns. So, what was the biggest thing you think that happened in 2022 that drove a lot of this?
Well, I have to say, Tom, the biggest thing globally that happened in 2022 was the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And of course, this is a serious news story in many, many different ways, both politically in terms of humanitarian challenges for the people there, including, of course, Western support for the Ukrainian army, all the things that have happened. But of course, there's a really big tech angle here as well. Russia has long been involved in the global tech economy, as has Ukraine. And yet, all of these activities have been dramatically impacted by the Russian invasion, to the point that ever since March, we've been seeing Russia really ostracized in a way that almost no other country has. As I talked about before, the US is really aggressively moving against China and trying to restrict access to China. But of course, that's nothing like what they're doing to Russia. And this is causing all sorts of trouble for many, many tech companies. But of course, it's also impacting Ukrainian tech companies. And it's important to recognize that there's a lot of tech in Ukraine. A lot of that has had to move out because of the war. A lot of the people are refugees in other countries now. But it's actually kind of heartening to see that a lot of the Ukrainian companies are still actually doing okay, even though maybe they're not even in Ukraine anymore, where they're working. But we did talk as well about the impact on China and the concerns that China would be supporting Russia, the impact on India, which is another country that has historically had strong ties with Russia. And this story is completely unresolved at this point. But it's safe to say that the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not limited to humanitarian and political issues, and it certainly impacts the tech industry. Another real economic headwind that we're seeing in the tech industry is a slowdown in venture capital spending. So we've long been watching venture capital spending as a way to sort of see what's next, what's coming to enterprise tech, and it comes in waves. I mean, we've lived here in Tech Field Day and Gestalt IT through many, many different technology waves, and you see new companies funded, and they come out with new products. But that's not really happening as much right now. And in fact, back in June, we saw a announcement that from Sequoia, a large venture capital firm, that said, look, we're not going to be investing quite so much. And this is what we've seen actually all throughout the second half of the year: a slowdown in investments, a retrenchment, companies looking to kind of shore up their finances. We saw sort of a last wave of venture capital funding rounds going into some companies, and that's great news for those companies, but also a pullback in venture capital and a real concern about spending, about the economy. I think COVID, I think China, I think Russia, all of these things are impacting this overall trend. But I think also there's just a desire to see sort of, where does this tech wave end? Where does it go? And when does the profit come? Now, Tom, we've seen some of the profit, right, from some of the corporate acquisitions this year.
Yeah, it seemed like there were a ton of acquisitions, but there were a couple that I thought were especially interesting. One of them happened back in June when Oracle bought Cerner for like $28 billion. You may think to yourself, well, why did Oracle want to buy a medical records company? Well, there's two reasons. One, they wanted to diversify their revenue stream because I believe Cerner was one of the largest customers of Oracle Cloud. So that allowed them to kind of have a different area to do things. But also, when you look at the greater shifts in the way that funding is happening and the fact that tech stocks took an absolute pounding on the stock market, a lot of these acquisitions, at least last year, were being driven by these high stock prices. So I think Oracle was trying to get in on that last wave of, hey, let's trade some goodwill and a few shares to pick up a big acquisition because things are going to get a little leaner pretty soon, and we need to be able to have different ideas around what we're trying to do. And that was one of the big stories about, that kind of tech acquisition craze. The other one kind of speaks to the fact that a lot of venture capitalists are saying, listen, we're not going to give you any more funding until you can prove that you're profitable. And that was driven to make other smaller companies maybe rethink their exit strategy. I think one of the ones that kind of illustrates this perfectly to me is a company like Pluribus Networks. We've talked to Pluribus Networks a number of times. They're a company that's pivoted a couple of times in their, long life, and eventually it came time to ask the really hard questions. Is it time for us to pivot once again, or should we look for somebody else who can kind of help us operationalize and make money off this technology? And in the case of Pluribus, it was the latter. They were picked up by Arista back in August, but they're not the only company that's made that decision. Some of them have gone from public to private to be, divided up and sent out in other places. Some of them are also looking at more of these key strategic partnerships that eventually become acquisitions. And at the end of the year, we're starting to hear lots of rumors about other crazy things that could persist into 2023. But I think another key indicator of what's happening is the fact that a lot of companies are seeing key executives depart for other jobs. We briefly mentioned some of the VMware executives departing out as in the middle of this Broadcom acquisition, but one that really got me was when Todd Nightingale left Cisco back in August. Now, you may not know the name Todd Nightingale, but you definitely know the business unit that he ran, Meraki. And after the end of Cisco's fiscal year, when things were looking really bright for Meraki and Cisco in general, Todd said, you know what, maybe it's time for me to go do something else. And he actually departed for Fastly. But this is something that we see in those times when there's a little bit of technical strife, is that the executives and the brain trust in certain companies say, maybe it's time for me to strike while the iron's hot, take advantage of some cheaper capital and maybe go out and build something big. We saw it back in 08, 09, and 2010 when the Great Recession happened. I think we're going to see that going forward. Not ready to say that there is a recession, but I'm ready to say that with all of these factors that are going on, it's causing a lot of folks to question where they're at, question where they're going, and make some harder decisions than they might have otherwise been willing to make. And I think that that's going to change the way that tech looks as we go forward with more rundown stories.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm going to be looking at, I think we're going to be talking about a lot of acquisitions in 2023. We've already seen a rumor of Nutanix getting acquired. We'll see where that goes. But I think that there will be more and more acquisitions, and hopefully more of these founders going out and starting a new company, because that's the exciting thing. We love to see new technology and new companies form. So I guess we'll see what 2023 brings.
Exactly. And if you want to tune in for some of the good stuff that we have coming in 2023, absolutely the rundown is the best place to do that. But there's even more.